So once again, it's time to talk about a shitty comic book movie on the Blockbusters show, except this one wasn't from the 90s like that Captain America movie I talked about earlier this year. No, this one is from 2010, and it's based on the DC character Jonah Hex.
Don't do this, Both, please.
Daddy!
Don't do this, no! This mark will remind you of the man who took everything you had.
After that night, some say he was a changed man, that his spirit crossed over.
Can you shoot?
Can you?
This war begins right here! I own you now!
It ain't much for being owned.
Now, full disclosure, before we talk about the movie itself, I'm not super familiar with Jonah Hex, but I did read some of the comics, and I do know that he appeared in some DC animated material. He was in a Batman animated series, and Batman Brave and the Bold, and even Justice League Unlimited, and some DC show on the CW that I never watched. But I know a little bit about Jonah Hex, and even from someone who's not the world's biggest expert on the character or the lore, even I know this movie was not very good. Having cheated death, gunslinger and bounty hunter Jonah Hex, played by Josh Brolin, has one foot in the natural world and one in the supernatural. His unusual nature gives him the ability to track down anyone or anything, so the army makes him an irresistible offer. It will erase the warrants on his head if he will find Quentin Turnbull, played by John Malkovich. Turnbull, his oldest enemy, is preparing to unleash hell on Earth and will stop at nothing to kill him. I already kind of talked about the evolution of bad comic book movies in my Captain America video, but I think it bears repeating. Like, the evolution of comic book movies, we've had some truly great ones throughout the years, but I think a lot of people forget about how rocky it's been for comic book movies throughout the years as well. Like in the 80s, you got the great ones, right? You got the original Christopher Reeve Superman movies. You had, you had Batman with Michael Keaton and Batman Returns, which may not be as good, but those slowly got worse as they went along. Like Superman 4 is really bad. Supergirl, which was a spinoff, and I already talked about that. That was also really bad. Obviously, Batman Forever was a downgrade from the first two, but it was nowhere as bad as Batman and Robin. In the 90s, we also had the super low budget trash. You also had like a shitty straight-to-TV Justice League movie and the unreleased Roger Corman Fantastic Four movie. That was when we had a bunch of bad comic book movies in that realm. Obviously, Captain America, which I did talk about. And then you get to the 2000s where technology was slowly getting better, and we obviously got some big ones and some really good ones. We got the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. We got Iron Man and Captain America. Those movies were really good. Then you also had some really bad ones throughout the 2000s. You had, big budget movies with really big name actors in them, and they still sucked, like Catwoman with Halle Berry, which I already did a video on that, and then some other ones that I didn't even talk about, like Fantastic Four with Jessica Alba, and funny enough, Chris Evans. The one with Deadpool that wasn't really Deadpool, that X-Men Origins Wolverine movie, that was pretty bad. And this movie sort of falls in line with that. Another movie that this was constantly reminding me of was one that came out a year after it was released, which was that terrible Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds. This feels more in league with that because they're both Warner Brothers movies. They're both based on DC characters. But this movie kept reminding me of that, where it's like you have the elements to make a truly great movie based on this character, and they just fucked it up. The character of Jonah Hex. Cowboy, badass, vigilante, well known for his memorable facial scar. In the comics, he fought in the Confederacy, but he was specifically anti-slavery, and he would often give himself up to the northern states because he felt that what the South was fighting for was wrong. And, there's lots of code of ethic with the character, and I think one of the strongest points of the character, aside from him constantly trying to fight for what is right and trying to stand up for the innocent, is the fact that the character doesn't have any superpowers. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like Batman. It's like he had to work to become a badass. He actually went through a lot of hell and back to get as good at fighting and being quick on the draw with his guns and weaponry. He's an interesting character, and I feel like going back and watching the animated series that had him featured in it, those are way better representations of the character than in this movie. I mean, the little that I know about the character in the comics, there are just so many things that they do with his character that just are completely rewritten from his backstory in the comics to the point where it's like, why even bother? Right away, the movie starts off on the wrong foot by having this backstory for him that his wife and kid were killed in a house fire that were started by his superior in the Confederacy, played by a completely wasted John Malkovich. And I mean, it goes without saying, John Malkovich, one of the many actors in this who's just absolutely wasted, and he tries, he really does, because it's John Malkovich, he's a good actor, but shit, he... In the comics, Turnbull, which is Malkovich's character, he didn't kill Jonah Hex's wife and kid. Jonah Hex's family just up and left him because he was constantly absent. Eventually, his son grew up to have a son and named him after his grandfather because he was that disconnected from his father, Jonah Hex. I guess they changed that because they wanted it to be like, oh, you sympathize with him because he had everything taken from him by the main villain of the movie. And they go out of their way to keep reminding you, these guys are evil, okay? Because another scene super early on, after you establish Jonah Hex in the current time, he now has the facial scar, he walks into town, everyone tries to pull guns on him, he fucking lays waste to everyone in that town, practically blows the thing up like it's a Michael Bay movie. But there's a scene after that where they show Malkovich and his assistant, once again played by another actor wasted in this thing, played by Michael Fassbender. Just to remind you how evil these guys are, they blow up a train that is full of military people and women and children. There's also this running thing throughout the comics that they do in the movie where Jonah Hex's scar is constantly being brought up, and you'll have somebody make some kind of smart-ass remark about, hey, where'd you get that facial scar from? Oh, why is your face so ugly? And then he'll usually get the one-up on that person, or he'll punch them or shoot them or something, and he'll have some kind of smart-ass remark back. And they do that in the movie, but it feels like every time they did it, they didn't really have fun with it.
Yeah. What happened to your face?
Got myself shaven.
Which brings me to the main guy that plays Jonah Hex in the movie, Josh Brolin. And like I'm going to be saying throughout a lot of this, poor Josh Brolin, he is wasted in this thing. I mean, he clearly molds into the character well, and I think that, makeup-wise, he does look like the character. I thought they had that nailed, but I mean, considering all the stuff they do with the character, like the changing the backstory and even changing the origin of how he got the scar, it just feels like so un-Jonah Hex. And I can't really blame Josh Brolin 100% for that, but man, I just felt sorry for him the entire time he was on screen.
Here's the voice you wanted.
The Clayton boys.
That's right.
Because not only do they change Jonah Hex's backstory in regards to his family, they also change the backstory as to how he got the facial scar. Here, it's that John Malkovich's character, Turnbull, wanted to torture him after killing his family, so then they marked him and scarred him. But in the comics, it was that he ended up messing around with this Native American tribe. They didn't take too kindly to it, so they mutilated him and messed up his face, and that's why he has the scar. And while there's like sort of remnants of that in this opening animated sequence, it just feels incredibly pointless.
Those medicine men did what they could to bring me back, but somehow they just couldn't. Didn't make me immortal. Just left me with the curse of knowing the other side.
Here's what that Native American tribe ended up doing to him in the movie. They cursed him, and they gave him the superpower to basically bring back the dead so that they can rush through expository dialogue. As someone who's still relatively new to the Jonah Hex character, even I was like, that's not a thing in the comics, as far as I can tell. But, you know, I checked to see if, like, other people pointed that out, and a lot of people who are way more familiar with the comic were like, no, that's not a thing that Jonah Hex does. And he does it, like, 4 times throughout the movie, and it's like, that's not a thing that he does. Why is that in this movie? And that's one of the many things that makes this stick out as yet another shitty comic book movie. It feels like it actively goes against the source material. It feels like they were just like, we'll get the bare bones essentials of Jonah Hex. Badass Western guy, goes around shooting people a lot. You know, he's good at fisticuffs and hand-to-hand combat. But, you know, comic book nerds, you know, they'll complain about anything. So just put in whatever shit you want. And now apparently Jonah Hex can make the dead come back for a little bit. Why?
Recruited you.
Make the pain stop.
Who?
Make the pain stop.
Who?
Slocum.
Also throw in an obligatory love interest played by Megan Fox because it was the 2010s, you know, they were still hot off the success of her and shit like Transformers and Transformers 2. You know, she was hot with a lot of people, so hey, let's put her in the movie. And she's one of the people where not only does she feel completely disconnected from the rest of the cast, she feels especially unlike her character from the comics. Because at first I was like, wait, is she supposed to be this one character? And then, yeah, sure enough, she's supposed to be, I always forget how to pronounce her name. I think it's Talia Black. Because in the credits they just credit her as Lila Black. But her character in the comics, like, she's supposed to be a badass Western chick who has like a bunch of facial scars and she has an eye patch because her eye was shot out, and she's, you know, just like Jonah Hex, she's really good with guns. She's really good with a shotgun. But there's none of that in the movie. They don't do any of that. They don't mess up her face. They don't give her an eye patch. They don't give her any of that because after all, gotta keep Megan Fox pretty, so can't have her do any of that. And really, other than a couple of scenes where her and Josh Brolin have sex, well, or we see the aftermath of it where they're cuddled up in bed and they're having pillow talk, if you even want to call it that.
Which one was the first one?
I don't recall first or last.
What we call this one number 1. This can be number 2.
Those two had no chemistry whatsoever. I mean, like, they were trying, but, you know, despite the fact they're supposed to be hot, fiery, passionate lovers, they felt like they had no chemistry whatsoever. They felt like they just met each other 5 minutes ago. And yet they're supposed to be this, like, hot and sexy couple who, you know, they can take on anybody together and then have some really hardcore, passionate lovemaking scenes. They had none of that going on. Even though super early on in the movie you have Jonah Hex taking out an entire town basically and blowing it to Kingdom Come, the Union comes to him and says that Turnbull is on the loose, and they say that they can give him immunity if he can successfully take him out. So that's the overall gist of the plot, is that Jonah Hex is trying to find a way to stop whatever Turnbull is up to. Because what Malkovich and Fassbender and all their army are up to is they plan to use this super technologically advanced cannon, apparently made by Eli Whitney, the inventor of the cotton gin, to launch a bunch of cannonballs so far away, because it's apparently a super powerful cannon that can launch from like halfway across the country or some shit like that. And, you know, it's able, you know, just one lob of a cannonball from this thing can take down an entire fucking warship. They plan to use it to kill President Grant.
After he invented the cotton gin and started the Industrial Revolution, he went to work for the U.S. military, special projects. He pioneered the use of component parts and firearms, new combustibles for munitions, and more or less, he single-handedly invented modern warfare.
When we actually get to that part of the movie, like, this is like the third act when they really start to lay into that. First of all, this is incredibly stupid. Like, yeah, I get it. Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, and as far as I can tell, I did a modicum of research. Yeah, I can tell that Eli Whitney, his technology was eventually used during the Civil War. Like, he did eventually move on to like muskets and cannons, but come on, even if we're to accept, okay, it's fiction, it's a comic book movie, whatever, even if we can accept all that, that's stupid, right? And I also had this thought of, wait a minute, wasn't this the third act of Wild Wild West? Because the bad guy in that also wanted to take out President Grant, except in that movie it was a giant steampunk robot spider, and that was stupid. But I mean, cannon that's able to shoot balls super far away, and they're going to use it to kill President Grant, and apparently Eli Whitney was somehow connected to this. It's also just as stupid, right? There's also this part early on, it's in like the first act, where Malkovich and his army are getting their hands on these balls that they're going to use to fire out of their cannons, and they're glowing orange, and I just couldn't help but think, well shit, this might not be a very good Jonah Hex movie, but I guess it's still a better Dragon Ball movie than Dragon Ball Evolution.
Pretty orange balls.
Don't seem like much.
Aye. But they'll turn the world to dust all the same. Marvelous.
And so then throughout the course of the movie, you have Jonah Hex going around to various places trying to get answers, trying to figure out where Turnbull is. Several fight scenes ensue. There's a part where he goes to talk with a colonel at like this big fight, and this scene is so weirdly edited where you have our characters talking with one another, and then every once in a while they just keep cutting back to the two guys that the crowd is watching fight while they're talking, and it's super distracting. I think that in a scene like that, you'd want to focus on your two main characters as they're talking and, sharing dialogue, but no, they just kept cutting back to that. And I can only assume that the producers were like, damn it, you wasted money filming that, so fuck it, you're gonna put it in the movie no matter how distracting it is.
Go on. Get it done already.
You don't mean to kill me.
I haven't made up my mind. Let's see how this little visit goes.
And then there's a scene shortly after that where he meets up with an old friend of his, played by the late, great Lance Riddick, and he hooks him up with some guns that he's going to use for the third act of the movie.
Got anything new, Smith?
Thought you'd never ask. I take it that means you approve.
Then once you get to the third act, it's just a fucking all-out assault. You have, Megan Fox is fighting Michael Fassbender. You have it that Jonah Hex is going up against a bunch of people and just, shooting and fighting, fisticuffs. And here's the thing. Most of the fight scenes, when they're done in the daylight, or at least have proper lighting on them, they look okay. I mean, admittedly, I think there's a little too much quick cutting going on. There's way too much like shots lasting less than 2 seconds. It's some real getaway style editing for those kind of scenes. I would happily take those scenes in a heartbeat over what they do with the fight scenes that are done either at night or in super dark locations, because you can barely make out what the fuck is happening in those scenes. I seriously don't know how they looked at that and thought, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, put it in the movie, because you can't fucking make out what's going on. I watched this movie on like really good quality flat screens, and I couldn't make out shit all what was happening. I haven't had that problem in a movie since like Alien vs. Predator Requiem. It's that bad. But really, all it comes down to is they successfully stop John Malkovich. There's this big ending fight on a warship, and Josh Brolin and Megan Fox get out of there. And there was this stupid thing they established earlier on in the movie where there's a dog that they save that keeps following around our main characters. Maybe it's just because I reviewed this last month, but it kept reminding me of the stupid Predator dogs they had in that Predator 2018 movie. Oh, so stupid. But the dog ends up coming back at the very end of the movie because you have Jonah Hex on horseback riding off into the distance, and the dog is following behind him. And then they add the cliche Western, film grain starts to catch fire and then goes to credits. This movie fails on a bunch of levels. This movie fails as a comic book movie. It does the classic shitty comic book movie from the 2000s and early 2010s thing where it just actively keeps changing lore from the characters to try and make it more dramatic or more mainstream and appeal to general audiences instead of who they should be appealing to, which is comic fans. As an action movie, like the action, it's either way too quickly paced or you can barely make out what's happening. So the action, while some of it's okay, a lot of it is just incredibly hard to see. So I have to fail that. As an action movie, it fails. As a Western, it doesn't really work because just like Wild Wild West, it feels like once you get to that third act and it starts to go into like this weird science fiction level where you can make a cannon that's so powerful, you know, it can apparently kill President Grant if it wanted to, and it can take down an entire warship in one shot. You know, once it gets to stuff like that, it's like, okay, this is stupid. This is really stupid. And really, the whole movie just reeks of just wasted potential. Jonah Hex is an interesting character that has tons of, like, character dynamics and, you know, moral quandaries and stuff that are interesting to explore, but the movie just wastes it. And you have good actors who are completely wasted, and I mean, you know, aside from Megan Fox, who was just, let's face it, she was just there to be eye candy. That's exactly why they hired her. She's not really anything like her character in the comics, you know. But you got some good actors in here: Josh Brolin and Michael Fassbender and John Malkovich. They tried. They really did. They were being professional. They really tried. They gave it their all, but still, the material just wasn't there. This is a very bad comic book movie. I don't know if I can say it's the worst because there's still lots of stiff competition out there. But I don't know, man. I can't really recommend this. I can't recommend this for people who are looking for an awesome modern day Western. I can't recommend this to comic book fans. I feel like they're not going to like it. The sad thing is, this is still going to be better than what we're talking about next time because we have one more video for Blockbusters in October, and we're going to be talking about a movie that was already talked about on Mystery Science Theater. It's a shitty Gremlins ripoff called Hobgoblins. Oof. I've already watched it, and I'll just summarize it right now. Yeah, it really sucks. But until we get to that one, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.
Let me live, please!
I will. Only because it's too much trouble to haul your stinking carcass back east.